Hi, my name is Kirk Hamilton, your host of the Staying Healthy Today show. This is a show to bring you key experts in the fields of nutrition, prevention, integrative, and lifestyle medicine. And today's show topic is, can a week-long intensive meditation program change our brain structure and metabolism, create drug-like compounds, and enhance non-touch healing? Our guest today is a prior guest, Dr. Hemal Patel, PhD, director of the UCSD Cardiac and Neuroprotection Laboratories. And Dr. Patel is also the lead investigator that studies Dr. Joe's work on meditation and the scientific backing for it. So, welcome, Dr. Patel. Thanks for being on the show today.
It's good to see you, Kirk.
It's good to see you. I'm glad you put this together. I was excited when you got it, but when I read the title, it was like a tongue twister for me because the article is Neural and Molecular Changes During a Mind Body Reconceptualization, Meditation, and Open Label Placebo Healing Intervention in Communications and Biology 2025. So, I guess my first question is describe a 7 day. You did this at 1 7 day conference?
So this study was called Imagine, yeah, and so this happened. The data was collected during the San Diego 2022 event,
Right.
which was a week-long event where we did fMRI on 20 people, and so it's taken us that long to really put all of this stuff together and get it out.
So explain in a week long because I've done four of them, but
Yeah.
how many hours of lecture, how many hours of meditation, what is why does it make it an optimal place to do a study?
Yeah, I mean, it's a petri dish, right? Everyone's at a particular space. They're all located at the same spot, so it's easy to get access to them to get samples and other things. They're literally all doing the same thing, so they're on the same schedule. One of the things you do in science is you try to control for variables, and in clinical studies, it's really hard to control for things when you're collecting one or two samples every couple weeks. This way, you can get an entire study done in a week because everyone's there. What it does create is this issue of a barrier of a control, right? How do you control for something like that? Unfortunately, in this study, we couldn't have vacationing controls, which would have been the ideal control set. Individuals that were at the resort site but not participating in the week-long event would have been the perfect way to match the counterpart to the group that we looked at. Um, because of that limitation, because we just couldn't get enough people through the fMRI in not enough of a time, we opted to just use that observational pilot study of these 20 individuals, and we collected samples on them before anything started at the event. And so that we think serves as a baseline sort of capture on who and what they are from a perspective, right? And then they go through the week-long event, and then we look at their changes at the end of that week, and that's what that 7 day paradigm allowed us to do. I think you can say a lot of things about what happened in that week because you're spending, about 30 hours meditating, 20 plus hours listening to lectures, which is that reconceptualization phase, and about 5 hours doing these open label placebo, which essentially equates to these healing modalities that you do with these coherence healings.
Mhm.
And we really think it's a combination of those three things that then really creates the long-lived, long-term effect that we see in the paper.
So,
Um,
so
yeah,
let me just ask a second. So there's between 1,500 and 2,000 people that coded these things, these week
yeah,
longs. And then you said you had 561 subjects, and then you took 20 out of those because it was limited by the and fMRI stands for functional MRI. Is
yeah,
that what it's
functional MRI. Yep.
right? So why were I guess so was there only 561 people who gave samples during
There are,
the,
oh, no, so there's a consenting process that we go through. So we basically solicit volunteer consent paperwork through our IRB for anyone who's participating at the week-long event. So out of the 1,500 or so people, not everyone is interested in research. So out of that, 500 and some people sent their forms back and said they were interested. We then go through a randomization process to pick how many people we can accommodate in the study out of that pool of 500 or so people. So those were the likely eligible, and then we had to narrow that down to 20 based on the time commitment and the resources we had in order to do what we could get through to the fMRI.
So did those 561 have any of the blood work done or the
Nope.
other parameters? No. So it was
No,
just
so
21.
unless they were picked into the 20, they would not be involved in the rest of the study. And then this is one of the problems with some of our studies is that they're very popular, right? Lots of hundreds of people want to be involved, but sometimes for things like this, we can only pick 20 to 50 people out of that large group. And so there are other studies that we do where we select really large cohorts, which is what we've been doing recently, where we'll look at 1,000 people and we don't turn anyone away as long as they fit our inclusion exclusion criteria. Um, and they're fit the inclusion, we'll keep them in. If there are certain things that exclude them, we won't let them join the study. But we've had thousands of people join studies as well. It really depends on what the resources are going to be involved in order to do that study and what the limit is in the number of people we can get through.
So tell me about the functional MRI. Why is it so novel to be able to do that with a meditation type study, and how lucky you were to have it available to do and what you were
Yeah,
looking for?
yeah. So the advantage of the functional MRI is basically that functional component, right? It's looking at the functionality of the brain, and it can also look at deep structures. We do a lot of EEG at the events, and so the EEG gives you surface level electrical activity in the brain. So it tells you how different parts of the brain are communicating, but it's really at this surface level. It's not looking deep inside. The fMRI is literally imaging inside your brain to look at how different parts are connected, how different networks are talking to each other, and basically how the brain is structured. And so to be able to do that, because we were in San Diego, we could take people up to campus and do the imaging on the campus facility was just a huge advantage. This is something that we're looking forward to. So we have a San Diego event coming up in a week and a half or so. And so we are planning a second fMRI study that'll happen again on campus. We'll be able to take people away from the hotel site, bring them to campus, do the fMRI, bring them back, and then do other collections and things that we're doing throughout that week.
Will it
Um,
be 20 as well, or will it be more?
so we have changed the protocol, so we've condensed the time signature that's needed for the actual full scan. There are a few more sort of newer things that we're doing. And this study is designed to look at the aging brain. And so we're recruiting individuals that are 70 and older. And
Oh,
then, as a caveat to one of the limits we had in the first study, because we didn't have a control group, this is something we're really striving for in this. And so we're recruiting location-specific controls. So people in the San Diego area that are 70 and plus, likely retired and essentially vacationing, right? They're not working or stressed about stuff. And so they'll form the basic core structure. They'll be given the same instructions at the beginning of the week, and then we'll see what the effect of that is on a 70-year-old that's living in San Diego area, just existing, versus a 70-year-old plus that's at the week-long event going through all of the changes that they're going through.
so the functional MRI is something that you don't see very often in meditation studies. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Right.
You
So,
don't. It is the gold standard for a lot of things because it does give you access to things like how the brain's connected with all these networks, how you can see structural changes. They're time consuming, they're expensive to do, and you have to have a site like UCSD that has all of the things that you can do this in. There's a lot of exclusion criteria. It turns out, we're in the process of recruiting currently for this study, and 70-year-olds have a lot of metal in their body. So it excludes them in unique kinds of ways, and there's other things like your CGM patch and other things will exclude you as well unless you take it off and those kinds of things. So lots of it's just a different level of scrutiny that you have to go through in terms of selecting. And that was the other thing we went through when we did the first study is that not everyone can go into an fMRI scanner, right? Because they have things that limit them from being able to be in there just for safety reasons. And so we couldn't include some individuals that were selected, and we had to go to some alternates as well. So it really depends on sort of how things end up with how many you recruit and how many you can get through the protocol in the time that's allotted.
so in these 20, well, first of all, there's some terms that I get confused with, and even though I've gone to these, I've gone to four of the week longs and four of the 4 days. Mind body conceptualization. Is that the same as Joe's meditation for me, or is that something different?
No, so we consider the retreat in three parts, right? So first is the reconceptualization. These are all the lectures that you listen to.
Oh,
So
okay.
these are higher level new thoughts that you're being introduced to that challenge the way you think about stuff. So it basically
Mhm.
causes you to reconceptualize how you see the world, right? When you're hearing about all of
I
these
see.
scientific sort of ideas and concepts, it's making you rethink, do I really believe this? Do I believe what I'm hearing now? And it makes you think, right? It
Uh-huh.
makes you
No, I
process
got
things
it.
in a different way. The meditation then is a way to allow that reconceptualization to seep in at a much deeper level. And so what the meditation does is it sort of quiets that noise, that chatter that's constantly trying to predict that future based on that known past, and it puts you back into this present moment where you can evaluate the information that's coming in a new light and either assimilate it or don't, right? And you have this processing ability that increases as a consequence of that. And then the third is this black box. We don't really understand really how it works, what it does, what the value is, but it is um, out there that people have this notion that when they come to these week-long events and they go through these coherence healings, that there is a massive protective effect they see from that experience, right? And so because we don't know exactly what it is, it's this placebo component to it, that there is this thing that you're intending, conjuring up, thinking about that then creates a biochemistry of that change. In an ideal world, if we had all the resources and all the time in the world, I would love to separate each three of those things out and see what the cumulative component of each is in an individual. And we've got plans to do this in the future eventually. But it's hard, right? And so we first wanted to look at what the week long does to an individual and then start thinking about how we can dissect the pathways out.
So these 20 people, they also did they have blood work for
They did.
the same extensive blood work
Yep.
and brainwave, I mean,
Yeah.
brainwave assessment and the regular stuff. I guess
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
and I mean that's the other. We did all of the regular stuff, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't.
Mhm.
The blood worked out really well on every individual. Sometimes it's hard to get blood from individuals that are thinner, have veins that we can't get into. The EEG, we were really excited to couple the EEG with the fMRI. This was one of our first times using the EEG system, and the files were corrupt, and so we couldn't sadly get any of the EEG data out of it, which just was devastating. But you have to
Too
do
bad.
the cards you're dealt with. And so, luckily, having this fMRI data gave us a way to look at what the brain was doing, and then having this blood data gave us really a way to look at what the body was doing.
So I just want to be clear. The coherence healing you're talking about are the healings on the last 3 days.
Yeah,
So that's what you call a coherence healing, and people don't might not know what that means, but basically there's a person laying on the floor and there's four people sitting in chairs on either side of them. They don't touch them, and Dr. Joe's doing a meditation, and whatever happens happens. So that's
yeah. That's the open
part of what
label
happens.
placebo part, right? Yeah.
Okay, got it. So let's go into some of the things that you found. So when you said that there was some beneficial effects or positive effects with blood sugar, you call the glycolytic metabolism. What happened? What did you see there?
Yeah, so we noticed that these 20 individuals, they shifted away from a mitochondrial source of energy to more of a glycolytic source of energy. So this suggests that they're really shifting their fuel state. And this happens, right? The brain is a glucose consuming organ. It uses a lot of this energy. And when you're doing these high level mental processing exercises like meditation, and when you're challenging your brain to come up with a new way of thinking and seeing the world, it takes a lot of energy for that change to happen. And so we think that there was this energetic shift that we're seeing. We're starting to see this in other papers and data sets that we're working on in this space as well. And I haven't fully put into concrete how I think of that hypothesis, but it's a new hypothesis that we're trying to test and emerge.
I got a little confused. So does that mean you were increasing glucose metabolism or you switched to a fat more of a
No, so
ketotic
we were
metabolic,
increasing glucose metabolism. Yeah.
glucose metabolism. Okay.
Yeah, which is fast.
Um,
I mean, if you think about a sprinter, right? A sprinter is using glucose for that high
right.
burst, quick energy. And then an endurance person is really using mitochondria in a unique way over a long time to create that large energy set as an
Okay.
endurance mechanism.
So what you said there was some neurite growth. Was that the assessment of BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic
Yeah.
factor?
So one of the things we noticed in the fMRI was that there were the advanced individuals, right? So we had two groups of individuals as well. We had experienced individuals that have been to multiple retreats, and so they know the process. And these are individuals that, when they're at home, they're typically meditating, right? They spend a couple hours a day meditating and being in that space. And the idea is that if you're one of these experienced meditators, this is likely a routine part of your life. So you've integrated this, like eating and exercise and other things, into a daily behavioral habit that you're doing. And so you're constantly practicing this, your brain's continually sort of evolving in this way. And then we had novice individuals, people who were first time to an event. And one of the things we noticed in the fMRI structural scans is the individuals that were these experienced meditators had a specific region in their brain that was larger in volume. So there were more neurons in that space relative to the ones that were new to this meditative experience. So it suggests that, like anything, right, you can exercise your muscles, you can exercise parts of your brain, and that will grow. It'll create
What
some
area was that of
functionality.
the brain?
It was a part of the default mode network that controls body ownership and your body in space, essentially. And so we wanted to use the blood to see if there's some reality to this, right? Is there some biological feature that meditators elevate factors that can promote neuronal growth? And so we basically did a counterpart in vitro assay. So this is in vitro, so out of the body in a cell. We created a model. There's a cell type that you can buy that most labs have. We have lots of these cultures going around. They're called PC12 cells. It's a pheochromocytoma that was isolated from a rodent like ages ago, and it comes from an adrenal gland tumor. This tumor had neurogenic potential, so if you give it the right mix of stuff, it actually turns into neurons. And so scientists use this as a model to look at neuronal growth and other things. And so we were able to put these basically PC12 cells in a dish, give them the stuff that would cause them to basically form neurite extensions. And then the two things we tested was, could we put plasma from these meditators before the event and plasma from these meditators after the event, and would it change the growth kinetics of the neurons? What we noticed is that there was stuff that the meditators were increasing by the end of the week that hyper-accelerated the growth of these extensions that these
Mhm.
neurites had. So this suggests that there is, right, that there's something happening at the week-long event where these individuals are upregulating pathways that support neuronal growth. And then one of the cool things about science is you could stop there, right? And you can make the claim, and all of these things are out there, and you can say, well, we put the blood on and it grows, and so it suggests that there's something that enhances growth. One of the things that our lab has always done is when we present data or we do a certain experiment, we want to show in multiple ways that all the puzzle pieces are fitting together like we would expect. So if this is true, right, that there is this bigger brain, then the next step is, could we isolate this into a smaller system that we can control and regulate and give it factors and see the same thing? So we see this brain region grow in humans. We take this isolated cell and we see that when we give it the post plasma, there is more growth that couples to what you would likely expect to see in the brain happen over time. But then the question becomes, well, what's causing that, right? And so we've done the proteomics of the blood, and so we had looked at over 7,000 proteins. And so what we did is we looked, and there are known pathways that regulate neuronal growth. And so we isolated that particular pathway to see if there was an elevation in factors that tied to that growth pathway. And what we did see was that there was an increase in those particular pathway proteins, suggesting that this human level growth that we see, we can recapitulate it in a cell model, which then tagged to blood changes that should support that change, right? That it wasn't a fluke, that It wasn't like there weren't growth factors that were elevated. We just saw this as an anomaly. There's
Mhm.
really a biological tie and connection to what we saw. And so it pieces the data together in this
So
neat way.
one of them was BDNF.
Yeah, one
That
of them was BDNF and then a
BDNF.
couple other factors in that pathway.
So how about inflammation is a hot buzzword. So everybody,
Yeah.
wants to reduce inflammation, but there's a pro side to inflammation. So this study showed, how did it show increased inflammation or anti-inflammation, and what's the beneficial effect of that on the brain
Yeah,
or health?
the protein data suggested that as well, right? You have pathways that go up and down. Inflammation's complicated. I think so one of the ways to think about it, most of my work in the past has been related to the heart. So when you have a heart attack, you need inflammation to happen, and fibrosis and other things, scar and other things to form to heal that tissue the best you can. The inflammation comes in and starts destroying the dead stuff that's there to take it out. Until you take out that stuff that's not supposed to be there, you can't get new things to build into that place. What we saw in this study was that there was an simultaneous activation of inflammatory and anti-inflammatory pathways. And so it was this uniqueness where you had this process to break things down that were needing repair, and then at the same time, a system to then come in and actually facilitate that repair through that anti-inflammatory pathway as well. And so that's how I think we're positioning this idea that meditation really does create this complicated form of inflammatory regulation. And if, I mean, again, we're sampling the blood, which is then sampling everything that's happening in your body. So it could be that there's repair processes happening in certain parts of the body, whereas there's
Mhm.
breakdown processes happening in others. And you need that dynamic to have sort of happening at the same time.
So you get the yin yang at the same time. It's like a little
Yeah,
yin yang ball.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, cool. How about, we got a couple more things here, like opioid production. How did you show that, and what
yeah.
did that mean?
Yeah, so that was again this one of the things we've seen in surveys time and again at these events when we do this, when we ask people to self-report changes in their health from the beginning of the retreat to the end of the retreat. Um, we get a huge report that there is this mitigation of pain, right? That their perception and feeling of pain goes down by the end of the week. So whatever they're creating is this biology that is less painful at the end of the week. The other thing we tend to see is that people are less fatigued, right? So if you're, and those are two big barriers to how we think about our health. So if we're in less pain and we're less tired, we seem to have a higher opinion of who and what we are biologically and from a health perspective. And so based on this data, one of the things that we've been curious about is was there a pain relieving aspect to all of this? And so this 20 group of individuals allowed us to probe this hypothesis at the first start. And so one of the things you can do is given this back end idea that people report this mitigation of pain, that we see a lot of this in advanced and novice meditators at these events, could we start probing this idea? And so we used what's called an ELISA. It's called a sandwich assay, essentially. So it's a way to look at specific quantities of opioids that are secreted. You can look at other proteins that there are ELISAs for as well. And so we were basically able to measure the amount of endorphin, which is the cognate to what a morphine-like molecule would be, and then dynorphin, which activates kappa opioid receptors. So there's multiple types of opioid receptors. So endorphin would activate the mu receptor, like morphine likely does, and dynorphin would activate the kappa receptor. And there's cognate versions of dynorphin as well. And so these were two things that we could measure by ELISA. And what we noticed is that at the end of the week, there were more of these compounds floating around endogenously in these meditators, and all of them, right? That we saw this elevated change in endorphin and dynorphin. We then went back into the proteomic data, right? So we have two pieces of evidence. We have this evidence from the past that suggests that people have this sort of mitigation of pain. And so now we have new evidence from this ELISA that we did in the study that lo and behold, what we see at the end of the week is that there's an endogenous increase in the pharmacy that would create this anti-pain effect, right? Opioids create this mitigation of pain. Now we see that individuals are naturally creating their opioids in their body.
Mhm.
So is this a fluke or is there some biology to this? So then you can go back to this large proteomic database that we created in these 20 individuals and probe all of the pathways involved in creating endogenous opioids. And what we saw was that there was an increase in the propensity of these pathways to create this. So not only did the individuals do it, but their biology supported how they did it as well, which is important.
So the next one would be tryptophan metabolism. That's one
Yeah.
of Dr. Joe's favorite things to go over, the 5-HTP, serotonin, melatonin. I used to memorize the whole cascade. So how did you show that, or did you show that?
Yeah, so it was through metabolomics that we looked at that. So metabolomics gives you all of the breakdown products in blood, right, of biochemical
Mhm.
reactions. And tryptophan is something we've seen over and over again in various studies that we've done. This was reported in the twin study that came out a few months ago, was reported in this one, and it's a pathway that continues to come up in these future studies that we're looking at. So tryptophan becomes one of these key molecules, right? Like you said, it's the pathway to serotonin, it's the pathway to melatonin. There is a side pathway that takes tryptophan to DMT as well, endogenously. And so it may be the pathway to natural psychedelics that we create as well. And so looking at how it's generated, metabolized, processed in the body becomes a unique feature. This is something that we're actually trying to do in the brain. So this we were looking at in the blood. I was just meeting with some guys on campus, and Alex, who's the grad student, who's the first author of this paper, and he's the one that's got this expertise in fMRI. And we were talking with another collaborator of ours at UCSD, John Dean, and the idea is in this next iteration of fMRI that we're doing, we're actually going to try to image tryptophan in the brain as it's doing its work, right? During the functional MRI, you can actually process certain chemicals and things that the brain is utilizing. And so we want to see at the core structure, is tryptophan being altered? And then could we see unique signature changes as well in the blood? Again, tying physiology back to the biology.
So is the clinical relevancy of this and Dr. Joe's desire to increase tryptophan metabolism, is it to have a mystical experience, or is it to what are we,
Well, so yeah,
or
so
are we
it's
just
interesting.
documenting it?
I think one of the problems with the way our studies are done is that there are two time points, right? You have a beginning and an end. And there's all this other stuff that happens in between, and we haven't been able to capture the variances and things. A lot of these things like tryptophan, melatonin, serotonin, they're circadian, they cycle, right? You don't have the same amount all day long, all the time. And so what we see with tryptophan metabolism is it goes up and down in certain situations that we're looking at. In this case, I think we saw a decrease in tryptophan metabolism. In the twin study, we saw a heightened tryptophan metabolism. And so one of the things we want to start incorporating in future studies is some circadian collection of samples that we could look at the rise and fall of these things across time. We're starting to look at dynamic captures of data as well. And so the idea is instead of capturing just two time points, could you continuously collect data? And so the wearables are one way to do this, right? People wear these day in, day out, and we get 24/7 data from individuals to see how their physiology is changing from second to second, minute to minute, those kinds of things, and then ultimately correlating all of these things. The other aspect is metabolism becomes really complicated. It really is a consequence of the fed and fasted state that you're in. And so, looking at how individuals are eating throughout that week, looking at how they're processing different types of diets and things becomes an important feature. This is a study we've wanted to do. It's just logistically something that takes a lot of effort to put together. And we have it planned for sometime in 2026 to actually look at the consequence of what goes into your body as how you process it and how you make energy and how you make molecules and metabolites and other things that will change your behavior during a meditation event.
So I want to close because I promised I'd get you out of here in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, what all these things that so you're proving this type of meditation approach, which is a little different. Most people think of, sitting on a rock and sitting in Indian style and it's all quiet
Yeah.
and you're listening to a stream. And Dr. Joe's talking, and that's a different kind of meditation or guided
Yeah.
imagery, whatever you want to call it. But obviously there's all these different biochemical and physiologic changes.
Yeah.
So what is a couple of your most just mind-blowing kind of things that you're excited about that this is going to hopefully help healthcare with?
Yeah, I think studies like this are a start, right? They're not perfect. There's lots of limitations, and we clearly outline what the limitations of our study are. Like I said, there's time and resources that limit what you can do in this. Um, the arc of what we've been funded to look at over 5 years is really the larger picture, right? And so there's lots of studies that we're working on right now that look at larger populations, that look at how physiology integrates with biology, how the mind changes blood, and how in larger cohorts. And so I think this is what I'm really excited about is can we challenge the paradigm by looking at really large numbers of people that are changing? A lot of these early studies that we're reporting all have healthy individuals that we're looking at. Some of our larger data sets that take a long time to process because there's just a ton of stuff that we're looking at have individuals that are not only healthy, but there are individuals in that database that have certain diseases that they're working with and dealing with. And so now we'll be able to see how this meditation not only impacts the sort of the healthy body, but how it impacts disease. And I think we're going to see a much more dramatic change in the biology of individuals that have specific chronic diseases that they're dealing with that they come to these meditation events to deal with. This idea, and I think the opioids and the tryptophan are just a scratch and a start, is we are we're our own pharmacists, right? We can make lots of molecules. I can't remember if in our last talk we went into this. I mean, this is how I started my PhD. My PhD was to figure out what are factors in our body that limit our ability to respond to a heart attack, and are there endogenous factors that then augment that response? And so there's this critical study done in the mid 80s where this group of individuals, it's a highly cited paper, where they were trying to create a large injury model in an animal to then study heart attacks that humans would have. And one of them came up with this idea that if we intersperse small heart attacks before the long traumatic heart attack, that we would create a bigger injury because now you're subjecting that heart to more injury. But paradoxically, it turned out that when they did this, the heart actually had less of a heart attack. And so what they then spent, years and what other groups, billions of dollars at the NIH have spent over 20, 30 years trying to figure out is what's this endogenous mechanism that was launched when the heart was exposed to a minor stress. And it created this entire new endogenous pharmacology that then allowed it to protect itself from this large heart attack. And my thesis focused on opioids, and it turns out that opioids are present in the heart. The heart is an organ that makes them, secretes them, responds to them in a unique kind of way, and creates a protective phenotype. And so there is this notion that we have a pharmacology that we can create. Our body has a pharmacology that it responds to. Granted, the pharmacology we consume from the outside is way more powerful and can sort of see dramatic shifts, but our body has that same ability. And I think this is one of the more exciting areas that we're really hoping to explore is what is the compendium of the entire pharmacology an individual makes when they go to a week-long event. And then the other aspect of this is I think you hit it on the head that this is a very different type of experience than sitting on a rock meditating in quiet. And so, can we start comparing all of the ancient forms of meditation that are out there that people do day in, day out, like yoga, breath work, prayer? I mean, we've never looked at prayer as an element of this in a very scientific way like we are. But now we have the box of tools that we can apply. And so the question is, can we take that same box of tools and start studying people in the exact same way? So now we can compare all of those unique things to what happens at a week-long event. And I suspect what we're going to see is that there's an additive nature to what happens from all of those different pieces that then build to what happens at a week-long event, because it is a combination of so many different things.
So lastly, in closing, Joe talks about your thoughts and emotions are energy and frequency, and everything's energy and frequency.
Mhm.
Does these findings of all these biochemical changes make sense to you on that quantum physics level? Does it?
Yeah, so that's something I'm my brain hasn't wrapped itself around yet, and because it hasn't, we're actually doing experiments to test that, um, to see if it's real. And I was telling the people in the lab that are designing these coming up experiments for December, it's we're using model systems that haven't really been used in this space in a unique kind of way. And we're going to probe to see if those systems that don't have intention and attention and things that they can apply, right? That's the problem with the human, is they come in messy. They have ideas of what's going to happen at an event. They expect this. They have placebo. Could we bring systems to site that don't have that at least I know don't have an awareness of who Joe is? I've never seen him on a YouTube video, and we see how those living systems respond. And there are very sensitive systems, plants, there's model organisms like C. elegans, Drosophila. There's cells that we can bring to site and look at this. And we can really see if they're absorbing that frequency energy in a unique way. And does it impact life? And so we're going to start putting this to the test as events start to unfold in San Diego, because this allows us to bring essentially parts of the lab to site because it's close. So it's coming. And I was telling the group, I mean, I don't hold your breath, right? I mean, it's probably 99.9% chance that either we designed the experiment wrong and it's going to be a fizzle, or that it's just more complicated than we think it is, and it's going to take us a lot of energy and time to figure some of these things out. We'll see.
Okay. I, I got to keep my promise. We aren't ran over 5 minutes, but I got to get you.
No worries.
I
That
get
was
you
good.
back. But you said the word. I'm not gonna. I'll just leave this thought. Ever since I don't think there's anything there. There's a placebo is not a placebo. If there's an intention in a placebo,
Yeah,
then it fits the Joe Dispenza model of thoughts and emotions. So
yeah.
I'll leave it at that. You have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Keep up the great research, and I'll talk to you soon. And I want to
All
thank
right.
you, the audience, for this edition of the Staying Healthy Today show. And until next time, stay and be well.